Colonel Maya Roberts adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and stepped through the sliding glass doors of the airport. The familiar smell of filtered air and faintly sanitized linoleum greeted her, blending seamlessly with the muted hum of travelers shuffling toward their destinations. She moved with quiet purpose, her leather jacket fitting snugly over a plain white t-shirt and jeans, a deliberate choice to blend in. She was not in the mood to stand out today. It wasn't that she disliked wearing her uniform. Far from it. The insignia and ribbons she had earned carried weight, a silent testimony to her years of service in the Marine Corps. But the uniform also invited stares, questions, and assumptions, some well-meaning, others laced with a skepticism she had grown all too familiar with. Today, she wanted none of it. She wanted to be just another passenger, moving from one place to another, unnoticed. The crowd at the airport moved in a rhythm she found oddly soothing. Families wrangled overexcited children, businesspeople balanced laptops precariously on rolling luggage, and sunburned vacationers in flip-flops compared notes on destinations. Maya slipped into the flow with practiced ease, tall enough to be noticed but carrying herself in a way that deflected unnecessary attention. She preferred it that way. Her destination was important, an annual military summit where she would deliver a keynote speech on diversity in leadership. She had spent weeks fine-tuning her remarks, weaving together personal experience and professional insight to challenge an audience that had spent decades viewing leadership through a narrow lens. It wasn't the kind of speech people would cheer for. It wasn't meant to comfort them. It was meant to make them think. As she approached the security checkpoint, she instinctively reached for her ID and boarding pass. The line moved slowly, but Maya didn't mind. It gave her time to reflect, to mentally rehearse the key points of her speech. The necessity of diversity in the military wasn't just an abstract concept to her. It was a lived experience, earned through countless moments of proving herself in spaces that were not designed for someone like her. When she handed her ID to the TSA officer, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, she caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He recovered quickly, handing back her documents with a respectful, "Thank you, Colonel." Maya nodded but said nothing. She had learned long ago that lingering in moments like these only made them heavier. She breezed through the rest of security, retrieving her shoes and duffel bag with practiced efficiency. Her thoughts returned to her speech as she made her way toward the gate. It wasn't just another work obligation, it was a chance to broaden the perspective of those in power, to encourage them to see leadership not just as a reflection of themselves but as a reflection of the people they served. At the gate, Maya found a seat near the window, pulling out her phone to scroll through emails. Outside, planes taxied across the tarmac, their hulking shapes a testament to human ingenuity. She marveled at how easily these machines defied gravity, a quiet symbol of progress. Yet, as she glanced around the bustling terminal, she was reminded of how often progress failed to extend to the human heart. The first boarding announcement broke through the background noise. Maya stood, her first-class ticket in hand, and joined the line. It was a routine she knew well, as familiar as tying her boots or packing a rucksack. But as she neared the gate agent, she felt a subtle shift in the air, an almost imperceptible tension she had learned to recognize over the years. The gate agent's eyes flicked to Maya, then to her ticket, and back again. Her smile faltered. "Excuse me," the agent said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is for first-class passengers." Maya paused, just for a moment. The question wasn't new to her, but that didn't make it easier to hear. It never did. "Yes," Maya replied evenly. "That's why I'm here." The agent's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, skepticism etched into the polite mask she wore. Maya handed over her ticket, her expression calm, betraying none of the irritation simmering just beneath the surface. "I'll need to see your ID," the agent said, her tone clipped now. Maya obliged, pulling her military ID from her jacket pocket and placing it firmly in the woman's hand. The agent scrutinized it for longer than necessary, her brow furrowing slightly. Maya stood still, her posture betraying nothing but patience. She had learned long ago that confrontation rarely achieved what she needed in moments like this. When the agent finally handed back the ID, her hesitation hadn't lifted. I'll need to check with my supervisor, she murmured before walking away. Maya exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The gate agent's words, her skepticism, her delay, it was all too familiar. It wasn't just about a ticket or an ID. It was about the unspoken assumptions people carried. The invisible markers that made Maya's presence in this line feel, to them, like an anomaly. Someone like her wasn't supposed to be here. Not in first class. Not as a colonel. Not without having to explain herself. Again and again, she glanced at the clock above the gate. Boarding was closing soon, and she couldn't afford to miss this flight. The summit, her speech, her mission, everything depended on it. Yet here she was, stuck in a moment that felt as immovable as the plains outside. Waiting for someone to decide whether she belonged. She straightened her posture, her resolve hardening. If there was one thing Maya Roberts had learned in her years of service, it was this. No matter how many doors were closed, no matter how many times her place was questioned, she would always stand her ground. And she would always push forward. As the gate agent returned, her supervisor in tow, Maya locked eyes with her. Calm, composed, ready. It wasn't the first time she'd faced this. It wouldn't be the last. But she was determined it would never define her. The line at the boarding gate moved with the sluggish inevitability of a train crawling toward its final stop. Maya Roberts stood in place. Her first-class ticket clasped loosely in her hand. Her stance relaxed but alert. She had done this countless times before, joined the line, waited her turn, handed over her ticket. Flying had become second nature over the years. A routine she could perform without much thought. But today, as she neared the front of the line, she felt the subtle prickle of attention shift toward her. The gate agent was a woman in her mid-30s. Her navy uniform pressed neatly. Her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her professional demeanor faltered slightly as her eyes landed on Maya. It wasn't an overt reaction. Just the faintest flicker of hesitation before she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Good afternoon, the agent said, taking Maya's ticket. Her tone was polite, clipped, but there was something beneath it, something that suggested a question she hadn't yet voiced. Maya nodded, offering nothing more than the calm reserve she had perfected over years of facing moments like this. The gate agent scanned the ticket, her movements slowing as she glanced at the boarding information. Then her eyes lifted, narrowing slightly as they met Maya's. Excuse me, the agent said, the politeness in her voice now edged with a trace of skepticism. Are you sure you're in the right line? This is for first-class passengers. Maya's expression didn't change, but the words landed heavily. Their familiarity unwelcome. She'd heard them before, or variations of them, in countless forms. They were always framed as a question, but they carried the weight of an assumption. I'm certain, Maya replied evenly. Her voice was calm, controlled, with no trace of the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. The agent blinked, her smile thinning as she examined Maya more closely. Maya could see the calculation behind her eyes. The effort it took to reconcile the woman standing before her, a tall, athletic black woman dressed simply in jeans and a leather jacket, with the notion of a first-class passenger. Can I see your ID? The agent asked, her tone shifting from polite to procedural. Maya didn't hesitate. She pulled her military ID from her jacket pocket and handed it over without a word. The agent took it, her fingers lingering on the edge of the card as if reluctant to believe what it might confirm. The ID was scrutinized, held up to the light as though it might reveal a hidden flaw. Maya waited, her posture relaxed, her face unreadable. She knew this dance well, the long pause, the double-checking, the unspoken doubt. She had lived it too many times to count. The seconds stretched into an uncomfortable silence, the noise of the bustling terminal fading into the background. Finally, the gate agent lowered the ID but didn't hand it back. I'll need to check with my supervisor, she said, her voice carefully neutral, as though she were merely following protocol. Maya's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her expression remained composed. Of course, she said, her tone carrying the same measured neutrality. The agent walked away, disappearing behind the counter. Maya stood where she was, her eyes fixed on the far wall, her grip on her duffel bag tightening. Around her, other passengers moved past without a second thought. Their boarding passes scanned without question. Their paths clear and unobstructed. It wasn't the inconvenience that stung, though that was irritating enough. It was the pattern. The way this moment fit seamlessly into a lifetime of similar experiences. The quiet, unspoken assumption that she didn't belong. That she couldn't possibly be who she said she was. Behind the counter, the agent conferred with her supervisor. Their voices low but not entirely inaudible. Maya caught fragments of the conversation. Words like, verify, and, unusual, drifted toward her. Each one landing like a pebble dropped into a still pond. She checked the time on the clock above the gate. Boarding was closing soon, and the delay was becoming more than just an annoyance. Missing this flight wasn't an option. The summit, her speech, everything depended on her being there. When the gate agent returned, she wasn't alone. A uniformed security officer followed her. His expression neutral but his presence unmistakably authoritative. "Ma'am," the officer said, addressing Maya directly, "we need to confirm your credentials. Can I see your ID again?" Maya handed it over without hesitation. Her movements deliberate, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to ask why. She knew why. The officer examined the ID, flipping it over in his hand as though expecting it to betray some hidden flaw. Maya stood still, her patience wearing thin but her composure intact. She had learned long ago that anger, however justified, rarely served her in moments like these. "You're a colonel?" the officer asked. His tone more curious than accusatory. But the implication was clear. "Yes," Maya said, her voice steady. "Colonel Maya Roberts, United States Marine Corps." The officer glanced at the gate agent, then back at Maya. His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, finally handing back the ID. "You're clear to board." The gate agent stepped forward, her earlier confidence replaced by a strained professionalism. "Apologies for the delay," she said, avoiding Maya's gaze. Maya took the ticket and ID without comment. Her movements precise, almost mechanical. She didn't trust herself to speak in that moment. Not without letting her frustration bleed through. As she walked toward the jet bridge, she felt the weight of the interaction settle over her. It wasn't new, this dance of doubt and validation. But it was exhausting all the same. She found her seat in first class and stowed her bag, settling into the plush chair with practiced ease. Around her, passengers cast the occasional glance, their curiosity unspoken but palpable. Maya ignored them, her attention focused on the window as the plane began to fill. The hum of the engines provided a welcome distraction, a steady reminder of forward motion. Maya leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. She had won this small battle, but the larger war against the assumptions, the biases, the quiet but persistent disbelief was far from over. It wasn't anger she felt. Not exactly. It was something quieter, heavier, a weight she carried with her every day. It was the knowledge that for some, she would always have to prove her place. And yet, she had no intention of stopping. Maya opened her eyes as the plane began to taxi. The ground blurred beneath her, a patchwork of concrete and grass fading into the horizon. The engines roared, and the plane lifted into the sky, leaving the airport and the confrontation behind. But Maya knew the real challenge wasn't left behind on the ground. It was waiting for her. In conference rooms, on podiums, in the silent spaces where prejudice lived. Unseen but deeply felt. And she was ready for it. Maya Roberts leaned back in her seat, her gaze fixed on the small, round window beside her. Outside, the world blurred into a patchwork of colors as the plane climbed higher. Its engines humming steadily. She could still feel the tension from the encounter at the gate lingering in her chest. A faint ache that refused to subside. The first-class cabin was quiet, its occupants absorbed in their own routines. A businessman 2 rows ahead typed furiously on his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. A couple beside him murmured softly to each other, their words indistinct but warm. The flight attendant moved gracefully between rows, offering drinks and small snacks with a polished smile that seemed effortless. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to breathe deeply, her shoulders sinking into the soft leather of her seat. The contrast between the serenity of the cabin and the turbulence of her emotions was stark. She felt untethered, as though her mind hadn't fully joined her body on this flight. It wasn't the first time she had faced such an encounter. The gate agent's hesitation, the supervisor's questions, even the well-meaning but skeptical look from the security officer, they were all part of a pattern. Maya had learned to carry these moments like an extra bag. Heavy but familiar. Yet, no matter how accustomed she was to the weight, it didn't get any lighter. She glanced at the flight attendant as they approached. A tray balanced carefully in their hands. Maya asked for water, her voice polite but distant. The attendant nodded, their eyes flickering briefly toward her. A look that seemed to hover between curiosity and hesitation. Maya held the gaze for a second longer than usual, her expression neutral. The attendant moved on, leaving Maya to sip her water in silence. She knew what that fleeting look meant. It was the same look she had seen at the gate. In countless meetings, even during her years in the military. It wasn't always hostile, but it was always there. A question. Unspoken but loud enough to fill the room. She turned her attention to the view outside. Clouds stretched endlessly, their soft edges glowing faintly against the sunlight. From this height, the divisions of the world below, cities, borders, neighborhoods blurred into nothingness. It was a thought Maya often clung to on flights like this. A reminder that perspective could change everything. Her thoughts drifted to the summit ahead. The room she would address would be filled with senior military officials, most of whom had never faced the kinds of questions she encountered daily. They didn't need to prove their place in the room, they were already assumed to belong. Maya's words would challenge that certainty, pushing them to confront the biases that shaped their decisions and the structures they upheld. It was exhausting work, but it was also necessary. Maya had learned that early in her career. She remembered her first days in the Marine Corps, standing in formation under a blistering sun, the sharp barks of orders cutting through the air. Back then, her greatest challenge had been convincing herself that she could endure the physical and mental strain. She had focused on the tangible hurdles, completing drills, memorizing protocols, excelling in her training. It wasn't until she started rising through the ranks that she realized the true challenges weren't physical. They were quieter, harder to pinpoint, but no less real. They came in the form of questions disguised as compliments. You must be so strong to make it this far, and in the way people hesitated before addressing her as Colonel. As though the word didn't quite fit in their mouths. Maya took another sip of water, her grip tightening briefly on the cup. These memories didn't anger her. Not exactly. Instead, they left her with a quiet ache. A reminder of how far she had come and how far there was still to go. The flight attendant returned, clearing empty cups and trays. They offered Maya a polite smile. One she returned without hesitation. She had learned to master these small interactions, to keep them light and unremarkable. It was a skill she had honed over years of navigating spaces where her presence was an exception, not the norm. The hum of the engines softened as the plane leveled out. Around her, passengers adjusted their seats, pulled out magazines, or closed their eyes for a nap. Maya reached into her bag and retrieved her notebook. She flipped it open to the page where she had outlined her speech. The neat lines of her handwriting a small comfort in the midst of her unsettled thoughts. Her pen hovered over the paper as she considered how to begin. The summit wasn't just an opportunity to speak, it was a chance to be heard. But how could she convey the weight of her experiences to an audience that had never carried them? How could she make them see what she saw, feel what she felt, without alienating them in the process? She thought about the gate agent, the supervisor, the officer, their hesitation, their doubt. It wasn't personal. Not in the way an insult might be. It was deeper than that. Rooted in the quiet assumptions they carried without even realizing it. That was what made it so difficult to address. It wasn't overt, but it was constant, like a low hum that never fully disappeared. Maya jotted down a few lines, her pen moving deliberately across the page. The words came slowly, but they came. Leadership isn't just about who holds the title. It's about who we allow into the room, whose voices we amplify, and whose we silence. It's about recognizing that talent and potential aren't limited by race, gender, or background. The question is not whether we need diversity. The question is whether we are brave enough to embrace it. She stared at the words for a long moment, her pen resting against the edge of the paper. They felt right strong, but not confrontational, honest. The announcement for landing crackled through the speakers, pulling Maya from her thoughts. She closed the notebook and tucked it back into her bag, her focus shifting to the descent. As the plane began its slow glide toward the ground, Maya felt the familiar weight settle over her shoulders once more. It wasn't just the speech ahead or the summit. It was everything: the assumptions, the expectations, the quiet but persistent doubts. But Maya was no stranger to carrying weight. She had been carrying it all her life. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, and the cabin filled with the sounds of passengers gathering their belongings. Maya stayed in her seat for a moment longer, letting the rhythm of their movements wash over her. Then she stood, lifting her bag with ease, and stepped into the aisle. The summit awaited, the speech awaited, and so did the work. Maya moved forward, steady and unshaken, as the doors to the plane opened and the world outside came into view. The terminal buzzed with the familiar rhythm of a busy airport, footsteps echoing against polished floors. Announcements crackling over the intercom. The muted conversations of travelers intent on their next destination. Maya Roberts moved through it all with her usual quiet focus, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She had landed, and her next priority was clear: get to the summit on time. She hadn't thought much about the confrontation at the gate. Not yet. It was another moment in a long string of moments she had endured, carried, and ultimately set aside. There wasn't time to dwell on it. There was never time. But as she made her way toward the exit, her phone began to buzz incessantly in her pocket. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was routine messages from colleagues confirming logistics for the summit. Yet the vibrations didn't stop. They came in waves: text after text, call after call. Maya paused near a quiet corner, her brow furrowing as she pulled out her phone. What greeted her on the screen was anything but routine. Her name was everywhere. The first notification she opened was from a colleague. Maya, are you okay? Just saw the video. Call me when you can. The video? Confused, she scrolled to the next message. This one from a close friend. You're trending. The video from the airport, it's all over social media. Call me ASAP. Maya felt a strange tightness in her chest as she opened the social media app she rarely used. Her notifications were overflowing, her name tagged in post after post. The video of her interaction at the gate had gone viral. It was only 90 seconds long, but it captured everything: the gate agent's hesitation, the security officer's questions, the quiet firmness in Maya's voice as she asserted her rank and demanded the respect she had earned. Someone in the crowd had recorded it all, and now millions of people were watching it unfold. She played the video, her own face staring back at her from the screen. Her expression was calm, but she could see the tightness around her eyes, the effort it took to remain composed. She watched as the gate agent faltered, as the security officer shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. The video ended with Maya's parting words, clear and unwavering: I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the respect I deserve as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. The comment section below the video was a flood of opinions. She handled it with such grace. This is what systemic racism looks like in real time. How could they doubt her? She's clearly in the right. The airline needs to issue a public apology immediately. Maya scrolled further, her thumb hovering over the screen. The messages were overwhelmingly supportive. But there were other voices too. Why does everything have to be about race? Maybe they were just doing their job. Here we go again, making a big deal out of nothing. She set the phone down on the small ledge beside her, exhaling slowly. The confrontation, which she had planned to leave behind, was now following her into the next phase of her journey. And it wasn't just following, it was leading. For a few moments, Maya stood still, her thoughts racing. She had always believed in the power of visibility, in using her platform to advocate for change. But she had never sought the spotlight like this. The video had turned her into a symbol, whether she wanted it or not. And now the world was waiting to see how she would respond. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from a civil rights organization. Colonel Roberts, we'd like to invite you to speak about your experience at our upcoming forum on racial equity. And another, from a major news outlet. We're covering the incident at the airport and would love to interview you. Please let us know if you're available. Maya's shoulders sagged under the weight of it all. She wasn't sure if she was ready to step into a role she hadn't asked for but couldn't easily refuse. As she made her way to the car waiting to take her to the summit, the notifications continued. She muted her phone, needing a moment of silence to think. The road outside the airport stretched ahead, wide and open, framed by the distant outline of the city. Maya stared out the window, her reflection in the glass layered over the blur of passing scenery. She thought about the summit, about the speech she had spent weeks preparing. Her focus had been on diversity in leadership, on the structural changes needed to ensure equity within the military. But now, the weight of her personal experience threatened to overshadow that message. How could she talk about systemic change when she had just become a walking example of the very issues she sought to address? The irony wasn't lost on her. The speech she had prepared felt almost theoretical now, detached from the raw reality of what had just happened. She had been planning to talk about data, about policies, about the slow but steady progress toward inclusivity. And yet, here she was, living proof of how far there was still to go. By the time the car pulled up to her hotel, Maya had made a decision. She would address the incident not as the focal point of her message, but as a lens through which to view the broader issues. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been doubted, dismissed, or disrespected because of their appearance, their identity, or their place in the world. As she stepped into the quiet of her room, Maya opened her notebook and began to revise her speech. Her pen moved steadily, the words flowing with clarity and purpose. Leadership is not just about holding a position. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels they belong, where no one has to prove their worth twice, where the strength of our institutions reflects the diversity of the people they serve. The words felt right, but they also felt heavy. Maya knew that when she stood at the podium tomorrow, she wouldn't just be speaking to a room full of officials. She would be speaking to the millions of people who had seen the video, who had shared their outrage, who were waiting to hear what she would say next. She closed the notebook and set it on the desk, her hands lingering on the cover. Tomorrow, the work would continue, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. The quiet hum of the city outside her window, a reminder that the world kept moving, even as she prepared to face it once more. The conference hall was a study in formality. Rows of neatly arranged chairs faced a podium set against a backdrop of navy blue and gold. The official insignia of the summit flanked by American flags. Military officials, dressed in crisp uniforms adorned with ribbons and medals, filled the seats in quiet conversation, their voices a low murmur that reverberated through the room. Colonel Maya Roberts stood just off stage, her hands resting lightly on the wooden lectern as she waited for her cue. She had spoken at events like this before, but today felt different. The weight of the past few days lingered in her mind, a steady undercurrent she couldn't quite shake. The air in the room carried the distinct blend of authority and expectation. These were her peers, leaders who had spent decades navigating the structured hierarchy of the military. They understood rank, respect, and the unspoken rules of decorum. But as Maya scanned the faces in the audience, she also knew many of them didn't fully understand her experience. It wasn't something they had been required to understand. The moderator, a senior official with silver hair and an air of practiced poise, stepped up to the podium to introduce her. His words were warm, highlighting her achievements with a formality that felt both sincere and distant. Colonel Maya Roberts has served our nation with distinction for over 2 decades. He began. Her leadership and dedication have been an inspiration to those who serve under her command and a testament to the strength of our armed forces. Today, she brings us a vital message on diversity and the future of leadership in our military. The audience applauded politely as Maya stepped forward, her posture straight, her steps deliberate. The sound of her heels against the stage floor echoed faintly, a steady rhythm that matched her calm demeanor. She paused for a moment at the podium, her eyes scanning the room. It was a skill she had honed over the years, allowing the silence to settle just enough to command attention without making people uncomfortable. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, each word measured and deliberate. "Good morning," she began, her gaze sweeping the audience. It's an honor to stand before you today. Not just as a Marine, but as someone deeply invested in the future of our military. Her opening was simple, but it carried a weight that drew the room's attention. We're here to discuss leadership. She continued, but leadership isn't just about holding a rank or wearing a uniform. It's about the example we set, the culture we create, and the legacy we leave behind. And if we're honest with ourselves, we know that culture has not always been as inclusive as it should be. The room was quiet now, the earlier murmurs replaced by an almost palpable stillness. As leaders, we like to believe we judge people by their merits, Maya said, by their actions, their abilities, and their dedication to the mission. But what happens when unconscious biases seep into our decisions? What happens when we unconsciously limit who we consider capable of leadership because they don't look like the leaders we're used to seeing? She let the question hang in the air, her tone calm but insistent. For over 20 years, I've served alongside some of the most dedicated and talented individuals this country has to offer. She continued, and I've seen firsthand the power of a diverse team, how different perspectives strengthen us, how inclusion broadens our capabilities. Yet, I've also seen how much work we still have to do. Maya's mind flickered briefly to the incident at the airport. She hadn't planned to address it directly, but the memory sharpened her focus. Just a few days ago, she said, her voice softening, I was reminded of how far we still have to go. An experience many of you may never have had to consider, a moment where my rank, my service, and my credentials were questioned not because of what I did, but because of what I look like. She saw a shift in the room. Subtle, but unmistakable. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, their attention sharpening. I bring this up not to point fingers or to dwell on my personal experience, Maya clarified. I bring it up because it's part of a larger conversation we must have. A conversation about the assumptions we carry, often without realizing it, assumptions that shape the decisions we make, the leaders we promote, and the cultures we create. Her tone remained calm, her words free of blame but heavy with truth. The strength of our military lies in its ability to adapt and evolve. She said, we've faced challenges that demanded innovation, resilience, and unity. Addressing the biases within our ranks is no different. It requires courage, not the kind we show on the battlefield, but the kind that requires us to look inward and confront uncomfortable truths. She paused, scanning the room again. The silence felt heavier now, the weight of her words sinking in. We can do better, she said simply, and we must. Because leadership isn't just about who holds the title. It's about creating a military that reflects the nation we serve. A nation that is diverse, resilient, and united by shared values. The room remained silent for a beat after she finished. The kind of silence that spoke of deep thought rather than indifference. Then, the applause began, polite at first, then growing steadily, filling the space with its quiet affirmation. Maya stepped back from the podium, her expression calm but resolute. She hadn't delivered her speech for applause. She had delivered it because it needed to be said. As she left the stage, the weight of the past few days lingered, but it felt lighter now. The work was far from over, but she had taken another step forward. And for Maya, that was enough for now. The soft hum of the rental car's engine accompanied Colonel Maya Roberts as she drove down a quiet stretch of highway. The morning sky was pale, streaked with the faint light of dawn, and the world outside the window felt peaceful in its stillness. Yet inside the car, Maya's thoughts were anything but still. It had been a week since the summit. Her speech had been well received, the kind of polite approval that came with nods of agreement and a few murmured, "good points," from her peers. But the deeper impact, the one she had hoped might ignite genuine change, was harder to gauge. The room had listened, yes, but had it heard? That question lingered in her mind as she pulled into the parking lot of a modest community center. The building was unassuming, its brick facade blending into the neighborhood around it. A small marquee by the entrance read, "Discussion on Diversity in Leadership, guest speaker, Colonel Maya Roberts." She sat in the car for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. This wasn't the kind of venue she was used to. There were no military insignias on the walls, no high-ranking officials waiting inside. The audience here would be local residents, students, and members of grassroots organizations, people with lived experiences that mirrored her own in ways many of her military peers could not understand. The viral video had changed everything. Requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and appearances had flooded her inbox in the days following the summit. At first, she had hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to step into the spotlight or take on the mantle of advocacy in such a public way. But the messages from strangers had tipped the scale. One stood out in particular. It had come from a young woman, a cadet in training. "Seeing you stand your ground at that gate gave me courage. It reminded me why I joined in the first place. Thank you for showing me that we belong here too." The weight of those words had stayed with her. And they were why she was here now. Stepping out of the car and walking toward the community center's entrance. Inside, the room was small but welcoming. Rows of folding chairs faced a podium, and a modest crowd was already gathered. Maya spotted a mix of faces, young and old, black and white, military and civilian. The diversity of the audience struck her as a quiet reflection of the very message she had been fighting to amplify. She was introduced by the event organizer, a woman whose warm smile belied the steel in her voice as she spoke of the importance of Maya's work. The applause was modest as Maya stepped up to the podium, but there was an attentiveness in the room that felt different from the formality of the summit. These people weren't here out of obligation, they were here because they cared. "Good morning," Maya began, her voice steady. "Thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor to be here among a group of people who understand the importance of community, leadership, and the ongoing fight for equity." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "I've spent most of my career in the military," she continued, "and in that time, I've learned a lot about discipline, resilience, and service. But I've also learned how deeply entrenched biases can be, even in institutions built on ideals of equality and fairness." She recounted the story of her airport experience, not in dramatic detail but with the quiet candor that had become her hallmark. She described the hesitation in the gate agent's voice, the doubt in the security officer's eyes, and the weight of the assumptions that had followed her to the plane. "What struck me most," she said, "was not the overt nature of the interaction, but the subtle ways it mirrored so many others I've experienced throughout my life. It wasn't personal, but it was deeply systemic. It was about the unspoken expectations of who belongs where, and why." The audience listened intently, nodding in quiet agreement. Maya could see her words resonating, the shared experiences reflected in their expressions. "But the truth is," she continued, "this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about the young cadet who wonders if she'll ever be judged on her abilities rather than her appearance. It's about the employee passed over for promotion because they don't fit the image. It's about the countless people who carry the weight of proving themselves every single day." Her voice softened. "And it's about what we do next." Maya spoke about the power of small actions, about questioning assumptions, amplifying underrepresented voices, and holding institutions accountable. She didn't offer sweeping solutions or promises of instant change. Instead, she focused on the incremental steps that could lead to something greater. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before the applause began. It wasn't thunderous, but it was heartfelt, a ripple of appreciation that moved through the crowd. Afterward, people approached her one by one, sharing their own stories. A retired teacher spoke of the discrimination she had faced decades ago. A young man in uniform admitted he had nearly left the military because he felt invisible among his peers. Each story added another layer to the collective understanding of why this work mattered. As Maya left the community center, the sky was brighter, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement. She felt the familiar weight of her mission. But it didn't feel as heavy now. The conversations she had sparked were small, but they were real. And sometimes, she thought, real change began with small conversations. Maya slipped into her car, glancing at the notebook on the passenger seat. There were more speeches to give, more rooms to stand in, more minds to challenge. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. The engine purred softly as she pulled onto the highway, the horizon stretching wide before her. The sun had begun to set as Maya Roberts sat at her desk, the warm amber light casting long shadows across the room. Her laptop screen glowed faintly, displaying an email inbox crowded with unread messages. Many were invitations, requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and collaborations. Some were letters of gratitude from strangers, sharing how her story had inspired them. But not all the messages were kind. Maya scrolled through the inbox, her calm expression betraying none of the frustration she felt. Among the supportive messages were notes laced with anger and resentment. The language varied, some were polite but pointed, others openly hostile. Why do you need to bring race into everything? This isn't about bias, you're just playing the victim. People like you are always looking for a reason to blame others. The words weren't new. Maya had encountered these sentiments throughout her career, woven into quiet remarks or disguised as professional critique. But seeing them now, written plainly, struck a different chord. It wasn't the accusations themselves that stung. It was the reminder that, for many, her experiences weren't just invalidated, they were invisible. She closed the laptop, leaning back in her chair. The room was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Outside, the last traces of sunlight clung to the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Maya thought about the past few weeks, the viral video, the summit, the community events. The momentum she had built felt tangible, like the first ripple in a still pond. But with that momentum had come resistance, the kind that quietly undermined progress with whispers of, not yet, or, not here. The pushback didn't surprise her. Change, she knew, was rarely embraced without a fight. But tonight, the weight of it all felt heavier than usual. She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the street below. The faint glow of porch lights illuminated the houses, each one holding its own story, its own struggles. For a moment, the stillness of the scene felt at odds with the turmoil she carried inside. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her back to the present. A message from a colleague appeared on the screen. Don't let the negativity get to you. You're making a difference. Maya, keep going. Maya smiled faintly, the encouragement a small but welcome reprieve. She picked up the phone, scrolling through more messages. One caught her eye, an email from a young soldier stationed overseas. Colonel Roberts, I wanted to thank you for your speech. I've struggled with feeling like I don't belong in my unit because of who I am. Seeing someone like you speak out gave me hope. Please don't stop fighting for us. The words settled over her, steadying her resolve. It wasn't the first message of its kind, but each one reminded her why she had chosen to speak up. She returned to her desk, opening her notebook. The pages were filled with notes, ideas, and fragments of speeches. She flipped to a blank page, her pen hovering for a moment before she began to write. Change is never comfortable. It challenges what we know, what we believe, and what we hold onto to feel secure. But discomfort is necessary. It's the first step toward growth. And growth, though painful, is how we move forward. The words came slowly, each one deliberate. Maya wasn't writing for the critics or the detractors. She was writing for herself and for the people who saw themselves in her story. She paused, reflecting on the quiet but persistent contradictions of her journey. She had risen to the rank of colonel in a system that wasn't built for someone like her. Yet she was constantly reminded of the barriers that remained. She had achieved success, but success hadn't shielded her from scrutiny. It was a paradox she had learned to navigate, but never fully accept. Maya set down the pen, her thoughts turning to the events ahead. Another speech, another audience, another opportunity to challenge assumptions and broaden perspectives. The resistance would continue, she knew that. But so would the work. The clock chimed softly, marking the hour. Maya glanced at the time, then rose from her chair. The night stretched before her, quiet and unhurried, but her resolve felt sharper now, steadied by the words she had written. Change was slow, often frustratingly so, but Maya had never been one to shy away from a fight. She had spent her entire life proving that resilience was its own kind of power. And tonight, that power felt as steady as the ticking of the clock. As she turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, the faint glow of the moon spilled through the window, illuminating her path. Maya moved forward, her steps deliberate, her purpose clear. The road ahead wasn't easy, but she had never expected it to be. And that, she thought, was exactly why it mattered. The auditorium was quiet, filled with the kind of anticipation that made every sound, every cough, every rustle of paper seem amplified. Colonel Maya Roberts stood behind the podium, her hands resting lightly on its edge. The bright stage lights cast a warm glow, obscuring her view of the crowd. But she could feel their attention. This was her final speech of the year, the culmination of months spent traveling, speaking, and listening. The faces in the audience were a mix of familiar and new: military leaders, civil rights advocates, community members, and students. Some were here because they believed in the work Maya was doing. Others, she suspected, were here to see what all the fuss was about. She had thought long and hard about what to say. This wasn't just another talk about leadership or diversity. It was a moment to reflect, to connect, and to move forward. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but warm. "It's an honor to stand before you tonight. Not just as a Marine, but as someone who believes deeply in the potential for change." She paused, letting the room settle into the rhythm of her words. "This year has been one of the most challenging of my career, not because of what I've faced personally, but because of what it has revealed about the work still left to do. The conversations we've started, the stories we've shared, they've brought to light the quiet but pervasive ways bias continues to shape our institutions and our lives." Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight. She could see heads nodding in the front rows, their silent agreement a small but meaningful affirmation. "When I think about change," she continued, "I think about my mother. She grew up in a time when doors were closed to her because of the color of her skin. She worked hard to open those doors for me, and I've spent my life trying to push them open wider for everyone who comes after." Maya's gaze swept the audience, her voice softening. "But what I've learned," she said, "is that opening doors isn't enough. We have to make sure that once people walk through them, they're welcomed, that they're valued, that they're seen." The room was silent, her words settling over the crowd like a gentle wave. "This isn't just about race or gender or background," she said. "It's about who we are as a society. It's about whether we're willing to see each other fully, to challenge our own assumptions, and to do the hard work of creating spaces where everyone can thrive." She paused, letting the weight of her message sink in before continuing. "I've been asked many times this year why I continue to speak out. Why I didn't let the incident at the airport remain a private moment. My answer is simple: because silence is easy, but it changes nothing. Speaking out is harder, but it's the only way to move forward." Her voice grew steadier, the quiet strength of her conviction evident in every word. "I'm not here to tear down the institutions I've served. I'm here to challenge them to be better, to remind them and all of us that our strength lies in our diversity. That true leadership isn't about power, it's about inclusion." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "I know the road ahead won't be easy," Maya admitted. "I know there will be resistance. But I also know that change is possible. Because I've seen it. I've seen it in the young cadets who write to me, telling me that they finally feel like they belong. I've seen it in the leaders who've told me they're rethinking how they make decisions. And I've seen it in rooms like this, where people from all walks of life come together to listen, to learn, and to grow." She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "This isn't just my fight. It's our fight, and it's one we must face together. With courage, with humility, and with the understanding that progress is never the work of one person, it's the work of many." The applause started softly but grew, filling the auditorium with a warmth that Maya felt in her chest. She stepped back from the podium, letting the moment wash over her. As she left the stage, she felt a sense of quiet resolve. The work wasn't over, not by a long shot. But tonight, as she walked through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to stories, she was reminded why she had started in the first place. The road ahead was long, but she was no stranger to long journeys. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a calm certainty settle over her. Change wasn't a destination, it was a path, and Maya Roberts was ready to keep walking it,